are good to go. So today is September 7th, 2022. We are here in the Minnesota Veterans Home in Minneapolis. My name is Kevin Yee. I'm the interviewer, and I'm here today with Mr. Gordy Botcher. So thank you very much for coming today.
You're welcome.
Yeah. I'll start with where and when were you born?
I was born August 28th, 1947 in La Crosse, Wisconsin.
Yeah. And who are your parents?
Art and June Botcher.
Yeah. What did they do?
My dad was a farmer, and then later he worked for the U.S. Department of Agriculture. My mother was a nurse.
Yeah. So what did you do while growing up?
Well, I grew up on a farm, so
Yeah.
worked a lot on the farm. Went to school, played sports in high school.
Yeah.
That was pretty much life growing up, was working and going to school and playing sports.
So pretty standard for Midwest.
Right.
Yeah. So did you have any kind of like military background?
No.
No. Yeah. Did you join the military right out of high school?
No, I was 21 when I went in.
Yeah.
I was drafted, and then I ended up getting drafted into the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
There was 127 guys, I'll never forget, 127 guys at the induction center in downtown Minneapolis. They came in the morning and asked for one guy to volunteer for the Marines. I'd had a lot of friends that had already been to Vietnam.
Yeah.
And everybody says don't volunteer for anything. So I didn't volunteer. Well, within 2 hours I found out I was going in the Marine Corps. And they took me in an office, swore me in. Had two Navy guys put me in a car, take me to Minneapolis, St. Paul International Airport, and escort me to the plane and made sure I got on.
Yeah. So they kind of sprung it on you.
Right,
Yeah.
right. My parents didn't know where I was for about 7 to 10 days before I sent home my stuff. And they thought I was in the Army in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and I was in San Diego, California.
So were you in college before that happened?
Yes, I had 2 years of college.
Yeah. Did you have any like inclination to join?
Maybe some, not a lot.
Yeah.
Back then, you could get a 4-year deferment if you were in college. I went to a junior college or a community college, which was a 2-year program.
Yeah.
And then I didn't start to a 4-year school, and I ended up getting drafted well, I got my draft notice, I think the 17th of December of 1968, and I went in February of 69.
Yeah. So before that, how much had you heard about like the war in Vietnam?
Well, it wasn't a popular thing, the way people got treated, especially the veterans when they came home. I mean, I had one of my closest friends from high school was in Vietnam and came home. We were going to meet couple classmates that weren't in the military yet either. They both ended up going in the military, but we went to this bar and this guy started picking on my friend who had his head, a real close haircut, and called him names, and it ended up to be a real confrontation, and we left, and so it was kind of the way things were back then. You know, you weren't a popular person when you came home from Vietnam.
Yeah. And was this like bar story from before you were drafted?
It was just before, no, it was after I was drafted, but I wasn't in yet. So it was a time period between.
Yeah. So when you were drafted and like the whole college thing happened, how did your family and friends feel about you?
Well, I think the family was supportive. Your close friends were supportive, but there was probably people that didn't support it because they did not support the, you know, like I said, they never called it a war. They always called it a conflict. They didn't support it.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it went to the media too.
Mm-hmm.
And there was, you know, it was back then there was all these protests, you know, make love not war, and you know, all those kind of things were going on. There was all these protests in Washington and at these universities, and you know, there was people, conscientious objectors, going to Canada so they wouldn't get drafted. There was a lot going on, you know.
Yeah. And what did you think about like all the stuff just happening around you?
Well, it was, you know, it's pretty shocking, you know. You don't know, you know, you don't know. You didn't. I mean, when I got home, I was treated by some people very nice, but other people that I thought were friends, I was never associated with again. It took a while to, you know, after this thing got over with in '75, it took another 20 years before, you know, people kind of, okay, it wasn't as bad as it was portrayed.
Yeah.
And, you know, I went through a long time in life where nobody ever said thank you for your service. It took a long time before people did that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, sure, the family, you know, your family was scared. Your close friends were scared for you, concerned. And so it was, you know, it was tough coming back. I mean, it was not, you were not the most popular guy in the block, you know?
And so at the time it was just a lot of like hysteria, controversy.
Yes, I would say that, yes.
Yeah. So going back to how you were drafted, when were you sent off to boot camp?
I went in February of 1969.
Yeah.
And I went to San Diego, California. And from San Diego, I went to Camp Pendleton at Oceanside. And then I came home for 15 days. And I was sent back to San Diego to go to communications school. And from there, I was done with communication school. I went back to Camp Pendleton for a short period of time, a week or two. Came home again for another 15 days. And before I came home, I had my orders to go to Vietnam.
Yeah.
So when I came back, from home, I went back to Pendleton. We were there, I don't know, maybe a week and a half or so. I remember I left on Halloween night. It was the day we deployed to Vietnam.
Yeah. So all of that training took nearly like half a year.
Right. Our boot camp was supposed to be 8 weeks. We went through in 7 weeks. We trained 7 days a week.
Yeah.
We never had to do KP or kitchen duty. Normally in in boot camp you had 1 week. Well, we didn't. They were pushing our platoon. They were pushing some of the platoons through so they could get to. I mean, they were looking for who we gonna send next. You know.
Yeah.
You know, and I think probably 75–80% of my platoon from basic training ended up in Vietnam.
Oh, wow. So, what do you remember the most about training in general?
Well, when we graduated from boot camp, we had a afternoon free, and we had one of the drill instructors, and we talked to him, and their theory is that they break you down mentally and physically.
Yeah.
From day one. And the first week is hell, to say the least. And then they kind of let up, but they're pushing you constantly. I mean, your whole day is planned for you.
Yeah.
I mean, from the time you get up, what time you eat, what you did that day, what time you go to bed. And so it was, I would say, very regimented. They knew what they wanted to do, but they were, I mean, these drill instructors, they'd all served in Vietnam, maybe 1 or 2 tours. And they were getting you ready to go there.
And at the time, the thought was, if you joined the Marines, you were going to Vietnam. Right?
Well, yes. I mean, you knew you were going to go someplace. Now, if you were going to if you're a guy that ended up going stateside or going to Europe, you were lucky.
Yeah.
And you might not go to Vietnam, but you might go to Okinawa or Japan.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the other Southeast Asian countries, and you were there as supporting what was going on in Vietnam.
Yeah.
I mean, we left from California. We went to, we flew into Hawaii. And from Hawaii, we flew to Okinawa, and we were in Okinawa for 2 days. And that was basically to get your clothes to go to Vietnam. And 2 days later, we're in Vietnam. That was.
So, about those drill instructors, how much do you remember about them?
Well, there was always one that was a bad guy. One that was a hard ass. After a while, you got to know them, they got to know you, it got a little bit easier, but you better follow their orders. There was one way, and that was their way. And there was no other way it was going to be done.
Yeah. And what exactly were you guys training and drilling every day?
Well, a lot of it was physical, running, calisthenics, learning about how to clean a rifle, how to disassemble and assemble a weapon, drilling, close quarter drills, marching, a lot of physical activity, a lot. I mean, you were going to get broke down physically, and then they would build you up physically and mentally.
Yeah. What do you think was the hardest part?
I think the hardest part was probably the adjustment of going into that, because of wow, this is, am I really here?
Yeah.
Everybody was pretty much in the same mindset. You were scared, because you didn't know what was going to happen. I mean, it was, you didn't know if you were going to Vietnam or not. They were preparing you, but, you were hoping, well, maybe I don't have to go,
Yeah. So when did all of your training finish?
Well, I finished in October, and I mean, we trained right up until the day that we left to go to Vietnam.
Yeah.
I mean, when we left California, we had trained for, I don't know, a week, 10 days. When I came home back on leave, there was it was called Advanced Combat Training. It was like a week and a half of intense training.
Yeah.
Physical, a lot of physical training to prepare you to be there.
And what are like just your most iconic memories of all of that?
Well, I mean, the training part?
Yeah.
Well, I think the physical and the mental was, for me at least, it was, you had to accept it. I mean, if you didn't accept it, he'd push you back to start training again. I mean, they had ways to discipline you, and they weren't very nice, I mean, I'd seen drill instructors grab guys, get physical with them.
Yeah.
And nothing is said, you follow their orders.
Yeah. About boot camp, would you say that movies like Forrest Gump and Jarhead portray that accurately?
No. I mean, you can watch Gomer Pyle or any of those. No,
Yeah.
it's maybe a little bit, but not really. I mean, that's that's fiction to me.
Yeah. And say after like a really long day and you got back to the barracks, what would you and the other guys be doing?
Well, I mean, at night you'd shine your shoes, shine your boots.
Yeah.
I mean, there was, every night you had no free time for yourself, none at all. Everything was, okay, we're going to shine shoes from 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
And from 9 o'clock to 9:15, they might give you a chance to write a letter home. I mean, I only had one phone call when I was in boot camp, home.
Oh, yeah.
The whole time. And it was, we were doing these wind sprints, and the guy that could win could use the phone for 10 minutes.
Oh.
And I won one on a Sunday evening. I won, so I got to call my parents for 10 minutes, and that was it. Call them collect for pay for.
Yeah.
So everything was from the time you got up to the time you went to bed, everything was down to the minute.
And right before you went to Vietnam, you got a few days of leave, right?
Yes, I was home for 15 days.
Yeah. So what was it like to meet up with your family again?
Well, it was very, very good. I mean, when I left, I remember my parents took me I grew up in southeast Minnesota, about 100 miles south of the Twin Cities, 110 miles, and I remember my parents taking me to the airport, and
Yeah.
are you going to come home or aren't you going to come home? What are you going to come home like? You were scared and your family was scared.
Yeah. And when was it that you were notified you were going to Vietnam?
I would have been notified in September of '69.
Yeah.
So I do about, I don't know, 30 to 45 days. Because I still had some training, but I'd got my orders. I think it was about 30
Yeah.
days total.
So not a lot of time.
No.
Yeah.
No.
So at the airport you flew back to California.
I flew back to California.
And how were you transported over to Vietnam?
We flew.
Yeah. And do you remember what it was like when you first arrived in Vietnam?
You were scared as hell.
Yeah.
You know, you'd already been issued your jungle boots and your camouflage fatigues in Okinawa, and when you got to Vietnam, you were issued a weapon.
Yeah.
And we remember we stayed at a base or a barracks at the Da Nang airport, and the next day I was sent by a truck, and I can't remember how many, if there was 8, 10 of us, but anyway, we were sent out to the battalion headquarters.
And how long was that truck ride?
Well, we were within, I don't know, where my battalion was stationed we were within less than a half hour from Da Nang.
Yeah. What was it like when you first stepped off the airplane?
In Vietnam,
Yeah.
you were scared. I mean, you didn't know if you were going up on the DMZ or you didn't know where you were going. I mean, when you got there, you had no idea what battalion what fire base or battalion you were going to go to. I mean, you could have been sent to up on the DMZ. You could have been sent to, well, they're not called states in Vietnam. They're called provinces. But you could get sent to. I mean, there was bases all over. There was all over. There was bases, so it was just, I guess, wherever they needed a warm body is where you were going to get sent.
Yeah. And they don't really tell you where you're going.
No. You had. I mean, we got in that truck. We had no idea where we were going.
Yeah. So after you arrived at your battalion HQ, what were those first few days like?
Well, I was only there, I don't know, maybe a day and a half, when I got sent to an outpost.
Oh, yeah.
So it was scary. I mean, I knew what company I was going to be assigned to.
Yeah.
But I didn't know where they were. Had no idea. They were only about, I don't know, 8, 10 miles from the battalion headquarters, but we were I went out to an outpost, and I was out there for, probably 3.5, 4 months before we moved.
Yeah.
And then we started moving a lot. I mean, a lot of times we were sleeping on the ground. There was a couple buildings at this outpost. It was an old lepusary, they called it. There was 2 permanent buildings, and the Marines had taken it over. And then we started moving for, we were sleeping on the ground under ponchos, 2 guys or 3 guys under a couple ponchos and trying to stay out of the weather, but we moved a lot.
Yeah. And what was that first outpost like geographically? Where was it?
It was on the South China Sea. We were probably a half mile from the ocean,
Yeah.
and everything around us was sand.
Yeah.
And it was kind of sitting up on a small hill. I mean, you could see the ocean from there, but everything else was, there was nothing else, nothing around. There was not, like, you know, everybody that went to Vietnam was exposed to Agent Orange. They never told us that when we got there. They never told us that when we got out.
Yeah.
But there was trees, but there was no leaves,
Oh.
no foliage.
Yeah.
And, well, why? Well, afterwards you found out why. You know,
Yeah.
years later you found out why. I mean, they never, you know, it took the military a long time to recognize that Agent Orange is, you know, can cause cancer. I mean, and there's other, I think there's 28 or 29 different, maybe even more than that, medical things that being exposed to Agent Orange can cause. I mean, there's Parkinson's, there's diabetes, there's a lot of things. I don't know them all, but there's a lot of things that, you know,
Yeah.
respiratory. I mean, like I said, they didn't tell us.
Yeah.
They didn't want us to know.
At the time, all you saw was just the trees were off.
Well, yeah, at the time it's like, oh, okay, this is the way things are. Well, then afterwards, a number of years later, then I realized, okay, this is what was going on.
Yeah.
Nobody talked about it.
Yeah. What did you think about it at the time?
Well, I mean, I guess it was just the way things were, and you know, you're scared. I mean, you're scared all the time. You don't know, you know.
Yeah.
You don't know if you're going to step on a booby trap or one of your friends is going to step on a booby trap. You don't know if you're going to have incoming rounds. You don't know what's, you know. I mean, everything might be fine, and 2 minutes later you're in a firefight. You know, you're taking incoming rounds.
Yeah. So while you were at that outpost, what was an average day like?
Well, I was radio watch, usually an 8-hour shift, sometimes 12 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Eat. I mean, you'd hand wash your clothes. There was no showers, so you washed up in a bucket or something, you know, try to keep yourself clean, but,
Yeah.
you know, it was, your day was pretty well set for you.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't a lot of free time.
What surprised you the most about being out in that outpost?
Well, I think the living conditions
Yeah.
was tough. I mean, we were eating sea rations. We weren't getting hot food.
Yeah.
But that's the way things were. You either you accept it or you don't accept it, and you better accept it, because if you don't accept it, you know, they'll either send you someplace else, or, you know, there was guys getting discharges for, you know, undesirable or you know, different, you know, there's different classes of discharge, and you didn't want to be one of those guys who didn't get an honorable. At least I didn't want to be. I didn't want to. I wanted my discharge to be an honorable discharge.
Yeah. Where would you guys sleep while you were out there?